Grip Inc. Grip Inc., for me, the album The Power of Inner Strength, is one of the greatest heavy metal albums I have ever heard. And I remember distinctly getting into this album when it came out back in 1995. The reason I'm bringing this up, the album came out 30 years ago this year, just celebrated its 30-year anniversary. But I grew up with this album. This was one of my favorite albums in high school. And just imagine being a kid during the grunge era, getting into heavy metal music. It was definitely a different time back then. But Grip Inc. is the band that Dave Lombardo formed or helped form after he was out of Slayer the first time. And I remember this distinctly because back in those days, you didn't have you didn't really have the internet the way it is now, and you didn't have social media. And the only way you really ended up getting news about any heavy metal bands, because most metal bands, heavy metal was kind of a dead thing in the United States, was that you had Metal Edge magazine, and they would have news blurbs in the magazine. And I used to have a subscription to it as a teenager. And I remember reading this blurb that Dave Lombardo joined a new band called Grip Inc. Now, at the time, I was, and still disappointed in the album Divine Intervention by Slayer. I didn't think it was very good. I thought the production was bad. And I think even Kerry King has talked about the mix being bad on the album. Paul Bostaff was a very good drummer, but he wasn't Dave. And the band sounded different. I didn't like it. I was extremely disappointed in the fact Dave Lombardo was no longer in Slayer. And this is coming off the fact that I loved Seasons in the Abyss, and I had the double live album that had come out at that time, Decade of Aggression. And I loved Slayer, especially early Slayer back then. I still do like their stuff, actually. Slayer's been a band that's been kind of hit or miss since Seasons, but I didn't like Divine Intervention. That's kind of the point of the story. So I heard about Grip Inc., and I was eagerly awaiting to hear something else. But again, getting news on a lot of these bands was not easy to do. So one day, and this is back in the days when you had a lot of small brick and mortar music stores, because the only way you could hear any bands was physical product, right? There was a place called Perry's Rock Pile here in Cleveland. Now, if you've ever been there, if you're from the Cleveland, Ohio area, and you've been there, Perry's is a place you will never forget. But the cool thing about it is that I went in there so often. He knew who I was back then. He knew what kind of music I listened to. He had a lot of really cool t-shirts. Like, I would walk in there, and this is what I miss about old school music stores, is that I walked in, he'd say hi, hey, I got a t-shirt from this band I know you like over there. I have some new releases you might be interested in, et cetera, et cetera. Well, one of the things Perry used to do when I would go in there, and this is something that a lot of record labels would do, especially smaller metal labels, like Metal Blade and Earache used to do this a lot, where they would print up and press a bunch of compilation CDs in like a cardboard sleeve, and they would send them off to radio stations maybe, or especially they would send them off to music stores. And he did one of two things with them. You played that music when people would walk in. Let's say, for example, somebody knew that I liked a certain band. Hey, I have a new song by that band. Check it out. And they had a lot of material from either albums that had just come out or albums that were going to come out that year. And he handed me this compilation CD from Metal Blade. Yeah, you'll like most of the stuff on here. And I looked, and I saw Grip Inc. listed on there, and I saw a song called Ostracized. That was the actual song on that compilation from The Power of Inner Strength. I was excited when I saw this. I'm like, finally, I'm going to be able to listen to Grip Inc. So I get in my car. I had one of those old school portable CD players with the tape adapter to it. Pop the CD in, go to, I think it was track 8. I could be wrong, but it was one of the songs later on in the compilation. And I listened to it. I immediately turned my car right around, go back to Perry's Rock Pile, that music store I was just telling you about, and I pre-ordered the album, handed them the $15 for it. And that was a very typical thing to do as well, because what would happen is you'd pre-order it, they would get a whole shipment of CDs in, and the day of the release, you showed up, you picked it up, or he would call you. Some of these places would call you to say, hey, your CD's here, go pick it up. There was no Amazon. You had some small mail order shops, but there was no Amazon. You didn't have any of these online websites where you can go shopping. The way that a lot of smaller labels used to promote stuff. Again, you either had the listening station in the music store where they had a CD from that label. You could put headphones on and you could listen to whatever tracks you wanted to listen to from some of your favorite artists. Or they had just tons of these promo compilations they would hand out to music stores, and they would give them to people that listened to whatever genre of music that was. And that's how I learned about Grip Inc. Now, when I heard Grip Inc., I heard that song, I was immediately excited. But when I ended up getting the album, I was even more blown away. Because I listened to the first, couple tracks, the intro and the first song on the album. Then I heard the song Hostage to Heaven. And then I think it was the song Innate Affliction as well. Hostage to Heaven kind of reminded me of stuff that Dave Lombardo probably would have done in Slayer. Innate Affliction had a really, really strong Neurosis influence on it, actually. But the album is one of the heaviest and most incredible records I think I have ever heard. The song Monster Among Us was absolutely, it's still probably my favorite song in the album. But this is a record, and Grip Inc. was a band that was so unique. And what made it unique was basically the combination of musicians that played on those albums. Gus Chambers, his vocals were so different from anybody that I've ever actually heard. And part of the reason the band disbanded, sadly, is that Gus Chambers passed away. And there really is nobody out there that could sound like him or really, could duplicate his kind of vocals. I mean, he was part of what made that band really, really unique. So Power of Inner Strength, to me, still, to this day, is one of the most incredible albums I've ever heard. And it came very close to matching how good this record is with the album Solidify, which I thought was a very close second place. Nemesis is a good record. They're all good. Incorporated is probably my least favorite. That was the last one that came out. But Power of Inner Strength is just... And I think part of it is the diversity of the influences on the album and the different types of musicians on it. Not to mention the fact that these albums sounded flat out amazing. But I ended up having Dave Lombardo on the show when Solidify came out. That album came out around when I started the radio show. And I actually met those guys at Harpo's. It's a small club in Detroit. And I remember when I first saw Gus Chambers, he was one of the more intimidating people I think I've ever seen. And if I hadn't interviewed him before, and I just saw that dude randomly on the street, he's definitely not a dude that you'd want to mess with. Like, I would be kind of like, okay, this guy's going to kick my ass or something. Cause he was a pretty intense dude, but he was super nice. Really cool dude. It's sad that he's not with us anymore. But Grip Inc. for me is definitely one of my favorite bands of all time. And definitely a band that I wish would have put out more albums. Unfortunately, we only have 4. The band was not around very long, but I will say this to this day, and I will continue to say this because people get mad at me when I say this, but for me, Grip Inc.'s the best band I think Dave Lombardo ever played in. From the standpoint that it's such a diverse band with diverse influences. As much as I like Slayer, I Grip Inc., especially this album, I think it's the best album Dave Lombardo's ever played on. I know a lot of people will give me a lot of flack, and 95% of you will give me a lot of shit for that, but nevertheless, this is an album that had a huge influence on me, and during the 90s, I remember listening to this album non-stop in the car. I used to get mad because the tape adapter would pop out sometimes. They would go bad after a while as well, but I could still go and listen to that album. I still enjoy it, and it is still one of the most incredible albums I've ever heard. So if you've never heard this record, I'm going to put a link to one of the songs off of the album as well. Check it out. If you've never heard it, it's a good album, The Power of Inner Strength by Grip Inc. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.